Welcome to our Wealth Compliance Leader Series brought to you by InvestorCOM. In today's conversation, we have the pleasure of speaking with Mr. Jim Allen, founder of Delahaye Advisers, a Virginia-based financial consulting enterprise. Mr. Allen was recently the head of capital markets policy for the CFA Institute and held various fascinating roles ranging from journalism to investment banking and corporate finance. In today's conversation, we will engage Mr. Allen on various emerging regulatory topics such as regulation best interest and the Department of Labor's recent guidance on rollover recommendations. Welcome to our show, Jim.
Thank you, Parham. Pleasure to be here.
As an industry veteran focused on a wide range of regulatory matters, you've had to wear many hats in your career. I'm curious, what has attracted you specifically to this intersection of the industry?
Well, I'll admit I didn't get into it because I thought it would be interesting when I got there. That just sort of, the interesting part sort of kept me in, and it came along afterwards. It was, I'd just been in, in investment banking. I'd worked and covered banks in Texas back in the 1980s when all but one of the 12 banks that I covered failed, so it was kind of an interesting period from that standpoint. I worked as a journalist for about a decade covering subprime banking and all these kinds of issues, a decade before they became really hot and troublesome in the 2000s. And then came to this about the time that the EU was establishing its Financial Services Action Plan, and I was working with the European Advocacy Committee at the time. So, working on the regulatory side of things, kind of helped bring it all together into kind of what I would call a coherent symphony of experience.
Very nice, very nice. So, investment banking, working on regulatory initiatives. If Mr. Jim Allen had a magic wand, the top couple of things that you would wave that magic wand in terms of sort of transforming the industry for the better?
Well, the first thing I think that I would do is educate every human about finance and investing. The magic would come. That's one part. The magic would come by, having them actually listen, grasp, comprehend, and apply those lessons that they might learn. Because, I remember I was, the Boy Scouts have a personal management merit badge that they teach, where they teach a lot about finance. And, these guys are like 14 to 16 years old, and they're just bored silly. I had to bring donuts and, play Pink Floyd's Money to kind of get them a little bit interested ahead of time. So it's, we've got our our work cut out for us. But I think financial ed is really a key. One of my former colleagues, Bob Stammers, is fighting that. He fought that battle at CFA Institute, and he's doing it now and doing some interesting things on LinkedIn that's trying to lay the groundwork for a better educated populace when it comes to this stuff. But the problem with it, the reason why financial ed is so key is because the rules that are designed to protect people who don't pay attention or don't bother to get educated about these matters, it's kind of like sand in the gears, right? We treat institutional investors and accredited investors different from the way we do retail investors. We give them a wider regulatory berth because we can accept that they will take the time, or they have the ability to take the time, they have the understanding to be able to step in and determine whether this is a good investment or not a good investment, and what the risks are, and therefore they can lose money if they wish to. The problem with it is with retail investors is they don't have that, and therefore you have to try to set up you have to try to set these things up. And so there's that lack of understanding of investment matters is one factor that creates that need for significant regulatory protection. That's kind of on them. On us, on the retail, on the investment professional side, is that asymmetry of information available to the broker or advisor when they're recommending a course of action, and the investor they're trying to influence doesn't necessarily see where the conflicts are, what the motivations are, how this might work, how it might not work, maybe the risks, so you'd need to have some greater clarity, greater transparency on those issues for investors as well. So if I were to, like I say, if I were to wave a wand, probably the top two things would be financial education and greater clarity about some of those information asymmetries.
That's if somebody had a magic wand, it would be well placed in Mr. Jim Allen's. So speaking of kind of the regulatory side of things, in just the past 2 years, the wealth management regulations have just mushroomed. For example, regulation best interest is considered to be one of the most significant enhancements to the conduct of standards since the SEC Act of 1934. What are your thoughts on Reg BI and how it will shape our industry going out, 5-10 years from now?
Well, I think I'd probably quibble with the word enhancement because they had a chance to add clarity, and Mike is as I've oftentimes said, it was like if they're trying to define many of the issues and the interactions between investment professionals and investors, it's going to take something with the girth of, like the Toronto or New York the old phone books that we used to have that were like 2-3 inches, 4 inches thick, but with the texture of Swiss cheese because of all the carve-outs and all the exemptions and exceptions that have to be made so that people can so that the markets can function adequately. And instead they went the route of complexity. So, I think that is probably my quibble with the enhancement. One of the benefits of the pre-Reg BI rule was, world was the flexibility. The brokers could sell, advisors could advise. The problem was that there was no clarity on which was which. I think Reg BI, one of the good things about it is it, maintained that flexibility. It tried to add some clarity, but it was at the same time, it sort of muddied the waters. For instance, what is best interest? Well, it's not really defined in there. So, that's kind of an issue. And because that's an issue, there's, I'm not completely clued in with what's happening in the political forces in Washington, D.C. right now. But, I can just imagine that the SEC is facing some heavy duty pressure to try to modify Reg BI to something that's more akin to what, either the industry believes or other advocates on the other side believe. So its fate is, I guess, in my perspective, is not absolutely certain. What does provide a certain amount of comfort, at least from the standpoint that the industry isn't going to have to immediately start, changing again, is that, it's pretty secure. It was done a couple of years before the new administration stepped in, so it's not going to. It doesn't have the some of the legislative capability, the ability of legislation to come in and change some of those rules and the like. So in that sense, we might get some inertia that allows it to stick around for 4 or 5 years. That doesn't mean there won't be modifications. The modifications include clarity and transparency. I think that would be all for the better.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Speaking of modifications and possible changes, in April of this year, we saw the Department of Labor's interpretive guidance of what they expect to see on the fiduciary obligations of advisors, specifically around rollover recommendations. In your experience, Jim, what are some of the best practices for dealing with regulatory change, going back to enhancements or regulatory change? And in your respective view, Jim, what role does technology play in embracing that change across the entire workforce at a wealth management company?
Well, I think technology is going to be helpful in at least streamlining some of this, some of the activities. The problem is that the back and forth on the political side, the regulatory side, keeps the industry guessing. I mean, if you look back, you ask what's sort of the best practice. If you look back 4 or 5 years, think about that. In 2016, DOL came out with a new rule on fiduciary duty obligations for investment professionals in the selling of investment products to retirement accounts and IRA accounts and the like. It got adopted in 2016. Court started immediately. The court cases started almost immediately and got overturned within about a year. And all that investment that the investment firms had to step in, because of course they had timelines that they had to meet and show the regulators that they were getting up to speed on this stuff. And they had to meet that stuff, and then all of a sudden within a year it's like it's a wasted investment. Now they've got to start all over again. In some ways, I'd say that sort of describes the best practice is to wait and see, but you really don't have the option of waiting and seeing and that in this realm. So the technology, I think, is going to probably become important, because at least compliance, it's hopefully it's an algorithm that can easily be changed, but it's in my experience, anything with computers isn't easy. They make it sound like it's easy, but it isn't. So my guess is that that it will help. It'll help streamline it to a degree, but it's still going to be an expensive process until or unless the policymakers get their act together and start saying, okay, the markets are bigger than our own individual political battles. We need to come together and do what's best for markets, for investors, for their country, right?
Absolutely. Mr. Jim Allen, thank you very much for sharing your insights with us today, between waving a magic wand and regulatory change and adopting technology. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Parham. Good to chat with you.
Thank you.